Okay. Okay, here this is the environmental awareness call. We're here with Mark Burr, Primary Water Technologies, and we're going to be asking questions about primary water, which is the water that's not heard of much in the world, but purposely hidden apparently, but it's a renewable resource that is available if we know how to get to it, and Mark does. So welcome, Mark, to the show.
Thank you.
Now, what are you doing in Dubai? You working on a project?
Yeah, actually, I came out here and set up a sister company with one of my technology partners, engineer Igor Zuykov, geophysicist from Russia, who invented and patented and still builds the resonance acoustic profiling systems. And Russia being what it is and America being what it is, it was a lot easier to go ahead and get an offshore entity set up so we can build quicker, ship quicker, because we're really starting to scale up pretty good.
Are you having any trouble with resistance with the governments and authorities with this, with what all you're doing?
Well, primary water, as you know, going back at least almost 100 years to when Stephen Reese came, drilled his first well there south of Las Vegas and El Dorado Canyon, and brought up free-flowing water where everyone said, "Are you a madman? There's no water." People have fought that tooth and nail, and that is just south, of course, of the Hoover Dam. And he was working for Herbert Hoover and many of his gold mines and so forth in the West and through the Americas. And what caught him and struck him as a German immigrant, well-versed in geochemistry, was how on earth in these desert areas are miners striking water that they cannot outpump? And don't believe for a second that all of it is unusable. In fact, the vast majority of the water from those wells, whether it be Eureka, Nevada, or Comstock Lode, or Tombstone, on, is quite usable water, not contaminated or radiometric. So he put two and two together and realized the Earth is actually generating water in all of its phases, hydrogen and oxygen combine under the electromechanical forces of the Earth to produce H2O. Much of it actually rises as vapor. 500 years ago, Agricola, in his De Re Metallica, called it halitus, meaning like halitosis, breath. It was outgassing of H2O, which we are seeing today on, for example, the GOES satellites, especially after tectonic events. If you watch Dutch Synths, he loves capturing huge releases of H2O gas into the atmosphere. And they know now it is the origin of our atmosphere. It is the origin of our water in this planet that it gives of abundance if you treat it well and understand how it actually works.
Okay, Kevin, if you can just chime in too if you have any questions. But my first question then is how does mineralization and the water vapor or water, how does that relate, the mineralization of water?
Right.
As it comes up? How come it's pure?
Exactly, right? How come it's pure, right? Well, number one, you call it crystalline basement, right? So our basement rocks, which is a lot of granites and other forms of volcanics, have H2O in them, right? In crystalline form. And so Peter Jacobson, who studied under Joseph Smith in the Colorado School of Mines, Jacobson is now in Illinois. He and his international group have published for 15 years more about Earth's deep water cycle and how exactly the pressures and temperatures that exist at depth can squeeze this water out. So I went to the big mines of America once and said, well, NASA must know about this. And sure enough, I found a hydrogeologist at NASA JPL, and he said, well, of course, we can even tell you the rock that water was squeezed out of. And I thought, well, why aren't you telling anybody? So, and they use colorimetric analysis. They use isotope ratios of hydrogen, oxygen, hydrogen to oxygen, and various other factors. And you can determine very quickly that this is new water at a minimum to our hydrologic cycle. And that was the name, of course, of our textbook, published in 1960, New Water, for a Thirsty World by Michael Saltzman, and the foreword was none other than written by Aldous Huxley. So quite a remarkable book that sadly was bought up and destroyed nearly to a copy, as it was in the midst of one of California's huge water wars, to create the Oroville Dam, dam the Feather River, and put the canal all the way from the north to the south that has Governor Pat Brown's name on it to this day. And they were not going to let any bohunk well drillers get in the way. And it was very intense fighting in the late 50s of the drillers versus the basically water monopolies that still control much, if not most, of the West's water.
Now, was the drillers had this idea that they could, was it like 12 wells or something, could cover the whole valley or something like that?
He started drilling wells in El Cajon Pass, out east of in San Bernardino. Those wells, you can look on Google Earth and still sit with chain link fences around them and not used. That's how intense the politics of water is, California, very sadly. Now, if you're not on the water system, you can buy your own land and you can drill your wells. We have hundreds, thousands of well inventory of primary water drilled in California, the Southwest, and around the world. And I consider myself a third generation primary water pioneer. Reese was first. Paul Power, who's still alive in his mid 80s, is still around. And there were other people in his generation that they're getting older. And then there's folks like me trying to pick up that baton. And if I have added anything to this, is that how is it possible in the 21st century, when we have the equivalent of a supercomputer in our hand, we are not using technology to locate water, and yet they tell us there's no water there? Oil and gas, you know how much they spend on geophysics and exploration, mining? You're kidding me, right? And water, talk to a driller. They will say not less than 1% of jobs is any technology used in the field. But who is used? Water witchers, dowsers, to this day. God bless them. They're an ancient art. They've been around a long time. But I'm pretty sure we could go behind the water witcher at a minimum and say, yeah, and this is what he's seeing. I think he's seeing shallow water. Here's an anomaly that we've drilled into before in the area, and we think it could produce a lot more for you. You know, or no, the witcher's great. I mean, I don't care. I don't care about witches. The Russians are very practical. They call it the biogeophysical method, BGM in English letters. It's a method, which is geophysics has methods. And just because we don't exactly understand the biophysics behind it doesn't mean it doesn't work. We know it works. But how about bringing geophysics in? And that's where I brought the two technologies of a gamma ray scintillation counter that amazingly goes back to Stephen Reese in California and Dr. Armin Bickel of NASA and Vandenberg Air Force Base. And it was revived and continued by the Germans. And they didn't even know the primary water story. They knew of Bickel in California, but they didn't even know the primary water story. The other technology is the RAP, as I told you. It's for profiling deep into the earth, rapidly on site. I have talked with people 30, 40, 50 years, their whole lives in seismology. I've demoed it in front of them. I'm the worst enemy of science. I'm a business guy who wants to solve a problem. And they are out of their minds immediately on their phone saying, God, what is this technology? This is, how come nobody knows about it? So Russia is what it is. It's fairly close, sadly. Igor did patent this in the United States, 2001, but his partners fought over the business and he went home. But he's continued to develop it, and we're launching the 5th generation of the product, of the RAP, this year with internal GPS and some other factors. So I can do those 1, 2 in front of people in the field. Seeing is believing. The whole thing comes to life, because they usually call me when they say, nobody can tell me where to drill my property. Like, either there's some study I have to get that's hydrogeology and it's really broad, and then, or it's a water witcher. They're like, is there really nothing in between? So that's really what drove me to give the middle portion to the primary water paradigm, as we call it.
Can you, in layman's terms, can you just simplify the gamma ray and the RAP technologies?
Yeah, no, excellent question. Gamma ray scintillation counter sounds like, wow, right? It's a high-end Geiger count, okay? But I'm not looking for gold or or pennies in the ground or whatever, right? Or certain rocks, where you would see with gamma, you would see a spike. And they would stand over, a mineralogist, right, would stand over that, a miner, and collect spectroscopy and try to determine, is it gold or platinum, whatever. I'm walking along and I see a drop in the data, just like that. I said, wait, now what would cause a drop like that? Well, water blocks natural gamma ray emissions. It's not any more complicated than that. Building an amazing mousetrap and a device that's to locate that and calibrate it is a specialty, and the Germans have been amazing at it for many decades. And so that's the gamma ray scintillation guide. You walk it, you're live, you're seeing a live readout, and it's just a number of the natural count of gamma coming out of the earth, right? And you're just looking for a pattern. So I'll come in and walk a grid pattern on a property, right? Or a circular pattern, and process it on site and start to look for patterns on that. Or I may throw down a flag real quick and say, wow, look at that drop right there. And I'll walk back over and say, wow, look at that. What's causing that? And then I can bring in the resonance acoustic profiling unit, a basically passive seismic system, okay, that's using a piezoelectric sensor, one sensor looking vertically. And then I'll take readings every 5 or 10 meters or whatever, and give a profile right there. Within half an hour, I can take 11 points, 10 meters apart. It's a 100-meter line. Process in front of you, say, wow, see that flag number 8? Change that from the yellow one to pink. There's a target. Look at the anomaly. That's what geophysics is all about. Why is there an anomaly there? In other words, something different than everything around it. In our case, that anomaly is a weak zone. Water follows the path of least resistance, including down there. And it especially loves to follow faults, fractures, fissures, and so forth. And so that's what we light up after we've kind of identified with the gamma. And of course, even before we get to the site, we're looking at topographical maps, geological maps, well inventories in the area. We're doing our homework to see what kind of information we can gather. And then we work with the owner and say, well, has a well been drilled on the property? How about your neighbors? Do they have a good one? Will they let us survey over their well, right? So I can see what that looked like. I mean, why is it a good well? Maybe it'll light up a structure. We'll say, great, that's what we want to find on your property, right? So yeah, if I had their well, I'd be a happy guy. Okay. And probably their good well was located by a witcher sometime in the past. I would say 3 out of 4 wells. When I get on top of them and I ask, why was it chosen here? I'm telling you, they will kick the dirt, farmers and everybody will say, we had it witched, including municipalities in California in a drought. They're not going to UC Davis. They're going to witchers, and they're running around right now. There's lots of articles in the newspapers around about it. Right?
How many witchers know about primary water, and can they find PW?
It's in effect, they are practicing the primary water paradigm, right? Because they are pinpoint locating. They're not saying, oh, well, there's a water table here, drill to 400 feet. I mean, why would you need that, right? They putter around with a willow stick or swivel rods or what have you, pendulum, and say, you know, here's where the water is, right? Now, sometimes they may just locate a good aquifer source for you, but oftentimes they are hitting what they call, in their terminology, a vein, right? You're not allowed to talk about veins and rivers of water in hydrology schools in the United States or worldwide, mostly, sadly, but they exist. Oil and gas guys bisect them all the time, and they're extraordinary flows. It's the enemy of oil and gas drilling and the enemy of mining, actually. And so they go to extraordinary attempts to avoid them. And so they most certainly exist, and they can be pinpointed. So in effect, right, when this water reaches the surface, we give it a very technical term, spring. Well, great, let's go look and drill for spring water, right? And by the way, most of your bottled water that says spring on it was drilled for. It wasn't a spring. They went to an area where there were springs, they sunk their own well, they compared the water and said, aha. And if it's under 500 parts per million, yada, yada, you can market it and sell it as spring water. Okay, whether that's Palomar Mountain, which are primary water wells located by Reese, Arrowhead. I mean, these are all drilled wells, and they're primary water sources for the most part. How
deep does gamma ray and RAP go? The technology, how deep can you go with it?
Excellent question. Gamma gives you a surface map, right? So I'm walking and looking for a pattern, but it's not going to tell you the depth, right? It's just going to show you like, wow, there's a preferential path flow, it seems, going this way, or this area of the property is lower than that. So I can now target, you know, my resonance acoustic profiling. So now you have a heat map horizontally. Now you bring in the wrap and it gives you vertical. That single machine can go from 0 to 2,000 meters with the same sensor. Now, obviously, we don't want to drill 2,000 meters. I'm usually using a setting of 100 to 250 meters depth, you know, and 80, 90% of primary water wells are shallow, my friends. They're not deep. All right, they're finding these sources. The crust of the earth is incredibly fractured. They discovered that on all the deep boreholes like Kola, you know, in northern Russia, the German one, the Long Valley, California. They expected everything to be so heavy down below it would all be solitary, you know, same rock. No, it's fractured. There's bacteria, there's microbes, there's water, there's oil, there's gases, all of those. And they went, what, 7 miles plus into the crust? It's a fractured crust. And so that water is moving around, and what they like to use the term, the fluid dynamics of the crust. Well, what's that fluid? Well, it's mostly water. And in fact, without that fluid, every earthquake might be a 10.0 and we wouldn't exist. So it gives a little bit of a lubricant to our broken crust.
So this doesn't cause earthquakes, the drilling for primary water in the fissures and the fractures?
No, 1 million wells are drilled, upwards of 1 million every year, and have been for a long, long time. Ours are pinpricks. Consider us like, what do you call it when you go in for your health and they put the pins?
Acupuncture.
It's like an acupuncture, actually, and you're helping earth release. Actually, if it's done right, and you're tapping these water sources, you're providing new water to a hydrological cycle that starts to get old, right? It starts to get used. And you're adding water to that. It's doing it somewhat naturally through massive springs that would be documented all over the world, including the US. But we're also doing some acupuncture, right? And we're pinpricks compared to, I mean, for what oil and gas and even mining do, I mean, this is a joke, right? We're talking hundreds of feet. They go thousands and miles at times, like up in Bakken Shale, 5 miles, huge bores, right? We're talking 4-inch, 6-inch, 8-inch. Okay, maybe you go to 12-inch if you got a real production bore for a municipality or something. I mean, that's pinprick stuff.
Kevin, you might have a question. I want to leave you out here, Kevin. This is Kevin from the UK, Mark.
Yeah.
Hi,
Hello, Mark. Yeah, there was a question that Tim raised the other day on the show that I thought I'd bring up here. He said if the water is continually being generated under the ground and flowing up and then onto the surface, why would then we not be experiencing flooding or the sea levels rising continuously?
It's a wonderful question. So I always like to pour a glass of water with ice cubes in it and then add water. Do the ice cubes sink? No. They tell us our planets, our continents are floating, and they plate tectonics and they've separated and moved apart, correct? That's what we're taught. And therefore, as water comes in, right, the planets are not, if too much at once, and you have to have a massive amount at once to actually inundate, and you get localized inundation in the world, right? But water events like El Nino is a water event. It comes out of thousands of volcanoes under the Earth's floor in the Southwest Pacific, right? And it's pumping. There's a perfect example of now a blood system for humans, which is, by the way, mostly water, right? Our blood is like 70–80% water. So this Earth is putting out through these volcanoes, and there are thousands of them, right? And sometimes it's a little more than less. And so when it's a little bit more, it's a little bit more warm water, and it floats to the east, and then it will affect weather patterns in South America and the United States, right? That doesn't have anything to do with global warming or cooling or climate change, right? That is Earth's own system and the way it manages itself, again, through water. And that's a water event. So we have many water events. You go to Bahamas and we're off the coast of Honduras and go into a blue hole. It's almost pure water in the middle of the ocean. Off of Point Magoo in California, you can go out there in a boat a few miles toward the Channel Islands, and guess what? Sweep off the top of the water, you can drink the water. That's how much water is coming off the Garlock Fault and coming up through the Channel Islands, right? The guys that have drilled offshore for oil, they've been murdered by that water too, because it comes up under incredible pressure. One offshore rig was completely busted, and it didn't end up in an oil spill. It was a massive water relief off of there. Same off of Lebanon. There's a massive, and it's known for 2,000 years. It's indicated by Pliny that they used to go offshore in times of drought, sweep across the top of the water, dip down tin jugs, and get fresh water in the Mediterranean. So we have massive upwellings around the world, and they come from the crust.
Can you kind of describe that, how it comes up from the magna and the process of it coming up through the fissures? I mean, it starts down the does it start way down there in the where it's heat related and the hydrogen and oxygen?
If you follow Peter Jacobson and his folks, they say the hydrous zone has now been fully detected between, I think they usually go in kilometers. I think they say 400 to 600 kilometers deep. We're talking like 250 to 400 miles deep. So that our crust continents are only about like 40 miles max, right? Something like that. So this is much deeper. This is occurring, as you say, in the mantle, and they can see that. Now, what's really fascinating about seismology is they always saw that refraction, right? So they said, well, what refracts? Well, they came up with magma. Okay, nobody's ever discovered magma, guys, right? That's what's known as a pseudo theory, a theory that is taught as unproven theory taught as fact. Okay, it's a water planet. And the refraction, as we know, is caused by water. And it's because by a whole lot of water built up in that zone, and there's a lot of olivine there, which is one of the catalyst elements to create water, right? So that's where they know. And they have published on this, peer-reviewed journals, everything else. But the geologists, they got rockets, okay? And sorry, geologists. Geophysicists look at things a lot differently. And the planetary scientists are coming back to Earth now and cross-pollinating with the Earth scientists going, wait a minute, didn't you know this? Didn't you know that? Wait a minute. And so there's really a lot of change in thinking over the last decade, especially since NASA basically was ended for the most part. And now you have obviously commercial coming in. But planetary scientists got let off by, I don't know, 15,000 in Melbourne, Florida alone in 2005. They're smart people. They ended up in a lot of different academia, and they're here in business, and they brought a whole lot of new thinking. And so that zone, hydrous zone, is there. We're spinning at approximately 1,000 plus miles an hour at the equator. So we're not a perfect sphere, are we? We're an oblate sphere. We're a little bit fatter in the middle than this way around, right? Because we're a slightly centrifugal force here, right? And therefore, that causes just enough of the outgassing of helium now. They make exploration, commercial helium. Hydrogen is underway in southern Mali and other places. H2O they're seeing come out of the planet every day now on the GOES satellites. Right. And by the way, where is the bulge on our planet? Above the equator or below it or at it? The answer is slightly below it because there's more land mass on the northern hemisphere than the southern, and the water compensates for that. So anyway, these are like basic, physical things about our Earth that a lot of Earth scientists have. They're not taught it, but the planetary physicists and others out there are kind of going, you guys didn't know that? Yeah, you may want to put it in the textbook. So it's very well now understood where this water is, the depths it's at, and the forces that cause it to slowly rise.
When gold mines, other mining operations, I know one of them, the Silverite mine in Grants Pass, Oregon, they had a constant pump there. They had to keep pumping the water out to get to the gold veins and stuff. So how does that work with the underground tunnels and subways and, like all when they hit this water? I mean, what
How
do
about
they?
how about the Tecolote Tunnel right there in California, right? And they show guys coming out in boxcars with steam coming out. I mean, that was a thermal water. By the way, totally usable. It was
Where is
just
this
hot.
again?
Tecolote, the Tecolote Tunnel in California, famous. They bisected an enormous flow of primary water, thermal in this case, and it was 100 and what was the temperature? It was hot spring. It was a hot spring water, and they had to stop operations for a while and deal with that flow in Tecolote. So there are a lot of places. I mean, why do you have such amazing thermal waters next to the Rio Grande, next to the Danube River? We can go on and on, right? Right next to the river, completely different geochemistry of that water. So where did that come from, guys? Well, it's almost always that's where the river follows a fault, and the water's coming up quickly out of that fault through the tectonics of the earth and reaching the surface in that case. So again, I repeat, we want to find the spring before it's sprung, right? Let's go find that high quality, good water that is healthy for us, that is negatively charged, right? By the way, we're talking 100, 200 millivolts. Human beings are about 70 millivolts and we lose our charge. So we're always trying to recharge our battery, right? Well, drink this water, natural water. It's very healthy, right? I located a well in southeast Cochise County, southeast Arizona, outside of Rodeo, New Mexico, 260 so feet. They broke through, stopped at 280, called the owner, said you got more water than your permit, because most permits, you're only going to get a 15-gallon per minute well pump allowed, right? Unless you go for a bigger permit, agriculture, whatever. And it was, when I went to visit them, the brass coupling coming off that well in 120-degree weather's outside, you couldn't hold it for 3 seconds. It was so chill, so cool, so cold. And what's to your west? The Chiricahua volcanic mountains, right? And so, we had fun finding it with RAP, and the client who I knew, their father, who was a grower in California, had learned dowsing earlier, and she was walking around dowsing, and I just said, go for it. And I would follow her, and I'd survey, and we'd go back and forth, and I'd say, well, I think I like this. I like the anomaly right here. I like what we're at, and you're liking it with your rods, and they drilled it. They were leaving the rat race of Phoenix, and they are the happiest people right now for the whole COVID period. If you see what they were growing on that property, it would blow your mind. It's really beautiful.
But once the spring has sprung, what do you do about all this immense amount of water or steam, or how do you cap it?
Rarely does it stay free flowing. I mean, you like it if it did, because then you don't have to use a pump. So one of my partners is Willow Stick, of all names, Willow Stick in Utah. They have a unique technology that they thought would save the world and locate water 15 years ago, but really they discovered it tracks moving water. So it's a water tracker versus a water finder. And they discovered what I was doing up there in Utah, and they've joined forces, or they buy my equipment and under a revenue sharing agreement, basically. And they are mainly in the hydro dams, mining, engineering, environmental industries, but they're starting to do more water search there. Now, they did a well on their own in Soda Springs, Idaho, where a spring was becoming contaminated for the town because it was basically on a ranch and so forth, and they wanted to tap into that spring water separately. They drilled and didn't have success. So Willow Stick came in, and later Gamma and RAP correlated perfectly, and they located 2,500 gallon per minute free flowing well. Zero correlation with the spring. And we could show that with the Gamma. I said, it's all getting higher as we go toward that spring. That's a separate source over there. And sure enough, it was. And they broke through and got huge production. I think they couldn't get past about 400 feet, 420. There was too much water. It was coming up under pressure. So they put a valve on it. No need. But most of the time, here's what you want. And this just happened in Indianola, Utah. This family just bought about 45 acres. And they surveyed Gamma, did 4 strategic lines, drilled. The target was down around 600, 700 feet. But we thought it might break through sooner, and it did. Broke through. The first water was at 100 and something, and the second water was down around 3 something. The driller couldn't get past 420, he said, and it was basically free flowing. But after about 4 or 5 days, it's now within 10 feet of the surface, the static head. That's a beautiful name. They can drop in their submersible pump, put up their solar, and they're off and running. So that's typically, we see the static head come down. It's like puncturing a Earth's hydraulic system. Psh, and then it usually calms down, gets back into syncope there, right? And then it's wonderful though, because it's typically well under pressure, right? That you can practically not out pump. But remember, you know, counties are watching, states are watching, so you're only going to be allowed a certain permit, and then you have to go back for a larger offtake. Most places. Now, you can do it where they can't find you and do your own thing, but for the most part, that is regulated.
You're using an air drill? What kind of drills? Is that the cleaner?
People say, wow, you know, because I talk about pinpoint, locate, and precision drill. Says, oh boy, what kind of, you know, complex drilling? I said, no, we will take any driller. In fact, I'll take a good driller over a good, you know, a great rig, if he knows what he's doing. But we prefer rotary air hammer down the hole, right? Blasting away. Typically we're in rock, right? Or if we're not in rock, we kind of want to seal off the surface anyway, get away from that hydrologic water, and then get into our zone. It's often quite difficult because we're in a fracture zone that it's caused by the earth every day. It's rubbing away and creating a lot of minerals and rocks in there and so forth. And so it can be tough. So you need a rotary air hammer with a strong compressor to kick that rock out that's being smashed down there. Smash, 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 swirl, 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 and up comes the rock. A dream rig is the dual rotary foremost rig out of Canada, and there's dual rotaries out of Germany and so forth. They're expensive rigs, $1 million rig. They'll do our jobs in a half a day and get out of there. Then you're dealing with the pumping and well completion guys. It sets the casing as you're drilling. So we say, listen, we don't want any water above 300 feet. We don't want to deal with it. Our target is beyond that. Get down there. They'll case and drill and case and drill, and then they'll start going open bore in the hard rock maybe, and boom, they'll start seeing our production of our water. Then we can pump test it, double check it, and try to go deeper if we want, or say, hey, we've met the client's objective. They have good, clean water. Finish the hole and get out of there. But Atlas Copco, rotary air hammers, Schramm, Dando from the UK, Dando are great rigs. You know, even a tow rig that can come in with a good compressor on it can get a job done. Not too deep, but a tow rig can get to, you know, 300-400 feet usually.
Kevin?
Yeah, I was going to ask in regards to how irradiated the planet is with all the radiation such on the surface, and does that affect then the primary water, or does the radiation only go so far and therefore the primary water isn't affected by it and still maintains its purity?
Excellent question. In most cases, that radiation, the strong radiation, the uranium, the thorium, potassium, and so forth are quite near surface. They're quite shallow. Created, by the way, by microbes, okay? It's poop, microbial poop. Under the right environment of pressure and temperature, that's what comes out. So typically, yes, we're generally a little bit more concerned with the gases that come with it. But for example, Jordan, the country of Jordan, was about to go out of water about 10 years ago. They were in panic mode, and they're not a wealthy country. So they went to Saudi Arabia and said, listen, the DC aquifer, DISI, it crosses the border into southern Jordan. You've been using it. You're pulling back from using it. Can we use it? Otherwise, we're going to have to ship in water. And of course, Saudi will probably end up paying for that anyway. They said, go ahead. So General Electric Water Resources, GE Water Resources, with their partner in Turkey, what's her name? Energy. Anyway, they were doing already a 300-kilometer road from the south. So they went and drilled 55 deep wells. We're talking over 500 meters, about 2,000 feet. 10 of those were observation bores, and they produce now over 100 million cubic meters of water a year from that desert to Oman. And within a few years, they said, oh my, we're seeing massive recharge, like 50 million cubic meters a year, they were saying. Well, how are you seeing recharge at a depth of 2,000 meters, 2,000 feet in a desert where 90 whatever % is evaporated and the rest is used by the surface or run off? There's no water seeping 2,000 feet through multiple hard rock aquitars. Recharge from below. So it's why Gaddafi's man-made river system isn't dry today. It continues to pump away in the Sahara Desert, right? And they love to call that fossil water because fossil fuels and fossil water. No, that's not the case. And of course, once peak oil was dead and buried by 2010, they came out with peak water in 2011 to scare us all, right? I call them the scaremongers of scarcity because they make money on scarcity and fear. There is a lot of water out there. We know how to find it. And it's actually the easiest moonshot mission out there. The biggest threat is the current regulatory regime that is protecting the monopolies that exist in water. Simple as that.
Yeah, what is the state of Libya and what Gaddafi started? Didn't he have like 4 or 5 huge rigs or something that they destroyed, or what's the state now?
No, I mean, that water was located by the oil patch in the 1950s and 60s, right? The US and the Brits and I even think the Italians, right? I mean, they were like, holy smoke, we're drilling for oil down here. We're getting like incredible amounts of water. And a decade later, you know, Gaddafi takes over and he starts developing all of that system for decades. It worked fine for systems. We come in there and overthrow a country and did some damage to the system, but the system's still operating. Believe it or not, I actually have a PhD from Libya who's working in the Iraqi oil patch based here in the Emirates, and he wants to go start what I'm doing there and return. They need badly to look at the well fields that were there and see, learn more using my technologies about their capability, capacity, and also help locate new sources that can be put onto those various canals. Or alternatively, help those people who will never be close to those canals find water, especially in the West in the Atlas Mountains, where there's plenty of primary water available and springs that are there that are evidence of that. So yeah, the system took a beating, but it's still pumping away beautifully and showing no signs of running out of water. And neither is the DC aquifer. They're pushing toward 150 million cubic meters of water a year pumped to Amman, now that they have another 1 million refugees from Syria, thanks to that overthrow or near overthrow. So these solutions they're happening. And by the way, the DC aquifer was a 25-year concession. GE made a lot of money on that, didn't they? It's about $1.05 a cubic meter for that project. But guess what? The government didn't pay a penny. They said, no problem, $1.2 billion, we'll drill the wells, build the water pipeline, all the pumps, deliver it, sign here for 25 years, and you can't get a better deal, right? For a government not to have to spend its CapEx and so forth, its taxpayer money, and get the price at a reasonable price that falls right in line with consumer pricing. And those who can't afford it, they're going to get government subsidies anyway there, right? So it was a beautiful current. That was in the last 10 years that occurred. It happened. It's still pumping away and seeing recharge.
And what's the capacity of the well that needs to be had to, say, in the relationship to how many people it can service, like a city or town? I mean, how do you determine that? Like one well can supply 15,000 people or whatever, and plus the irrigation that it takes to do that. I mean, can you kind of talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, Paul Power's Maji Mengi well, MAJIMENGI, in Kenya. Excuse me, in the Maji Mengi was Tanzania. And they've had a phenomenally successful program there of over 150 wells now in the Mara district in the Rift Valley. And those are average 60, 70, 80 meters only, again, under 300-400 feet. And each one is not a huge well, but it solves the problem of the clinic, the school, the village. In the last couple of years of reports from Lynn Hebenstreit of Global Resource Alliance, he doesn't talk about water anymore because they basically solved the problem. They're now talking about health and small farming and food and education. He, you know, after how many years? They started in 2007, and by within a decade, they had solved the problem. They even commercialized the rig. The guys who ran it for a long time under the NGO, they're now out with their own rig and making money. And it's outside of the NGO, and they're operating. So it's a beautiful example, and they have that 10-minute video you can find easily on YouTube. The NUUU, NGUNYUMU, NUUU well in Kenya is incredible, right? It's thousands of people are using that. It came up free flowing, and they've got it now a pipeline going over the hill to the other side, because it was smart. If you can get these where the water is coming under pressure, especially on a hillside or a mountain, you can gravity flow it, right, at much lower cost, especially if it's coming up free flowing. And so that well, the government said, we will not sign off on this well. The government geologist, this is crazy. You're on a mountainside, the water settles down there. Paul said, that's not my water. The chief got the end of the word, said, this is from Rotary International. This man's come all the way here. He's done his whole life. Just, you know, let him do it. And the guy said, well, okay. And he wrote, we do not believe there'll be water here. They came back after hearing of the news, say, oh, can we get some offtake for our schools? So that is just there's a little video of how it was drilled, a PRD rig from India. They're all over Africa. Another good rig, rotary air hammer, PRD rigs from India. And they went out, he found them in Machakos, Kenya. Guy sleeping on the truck, brings them out to the site. And in one day, they drilled that well. And it's servicing, in their case, a few thousand people, from what I've heard of the number of people. You know, a circle farmer who comes to me and wants an irrigation well for 160 acres, a quarter section, he needs 500 gallons per minute. Okay, for when he's really needs the water, if there's no rain and he's got to irrigate, he needs 500 gallons a minute. So I found those wells also for pivot, what they call pivot farmers, right? A community. Let's take Chekshani Cliffs, which that video is on my website and also Vimeo, right? The Conservancy came in of the county and said, these guys are up against the east slope here, the Wasatch Front, and they've got water where it's so bad in terms, it's people having to replace their pipes in their houses. And this is a fairly new neighborhood. So we went down where I had found a great well for a pivot farmer. It was over 1,000 gallons a minute, working at least 2 pivots, and located well. That's all documented in that 20-some minute video. I talk about the Madagascar project first with UNICEF, and then I talk about Chekshani Cliffs. That well was producing hundreds of gallons a minute at only 330 feet or so. They didn't say whether they went deeper. Their intention was to go to 1,000 feet, keep the water above 500 feet, and sell the water below it, right? The big casino of water rights. Wait till you ever read about that, right? It's a big casino. And so they had it was, you know, less than 450 parts per million. The engineer's email is at the end of my report there. It says, this is great, well, thank you. And that community now has a high quality source of water. And it's not a huge community, but, you know, Americans, we like our green lawns and use more water than most people per capita. But we solved their problem in the hundreds of gallons a minute. Needles, California right now is in big problems. 4 wells drilled along the Colorado River aquifer. 3 of them have been told you can't use them because they have a high level of manganese or something. And so they were down to 1 well. And we went out and located a fantastic primary water source on town land southwest of you know, out where the faults and fractures were. You think they gave us the time of day? No. They want their $1.5 million to go use the same money from the same state people to go to the same engineers to drill another shallow well along the Colorado River aquifer. So you can't fix stupid sometimes, right?
Are there examples in the United States where you can cite that they are supplying a town or city with primary water?
Yes, sir. Lake Elsinore wells are one of our most famous case studies. I think you know about them. You know, that lake went dry in Riverside County. in the 50s, an extended drought like we're seeing again today. They live in a desert. Drought is the normal, not the abnormal. People seem to forget that because they have so much water that comes out of that Colorado River, which can only give so much water, even in good years. And our population is 2, 3, 4 times bigger than when it was built. So they drilled those wells and refilled that lake. Each of those wells was doing over 5,000 gallons per minute, drilled into a cross fault of the San Andreas Fault system, which is the Lake Elsinore Fault on the east side of that lake. That was Vern Cameron and Bill Cox. Vern Cameron was also primary water pioneer and a dowser, a top dowser. He had so many instruments, they used him in World War II to try to figure out maybe they could find Japanese tunnels. And so those wells were refurbished in 2005, and they stayed in the articles and in the papers. They still produce 1 billion gallons per year to stabilize that lake. And I can tell you that's a fraction of what those are capable of. And
you have like 3 or 4 wells there, was it?
3 in a row. You can see them right on Google Earth at the south end of Lake Elsinore. If you look at it, there they sit on a little island spit, okay, which they could see, much easier when the lake kind of went dry, right? You're like, now you could see what's under a lake suddenly. It's not just all necessarily a bowl. Hey, wait, we've got some fracture system going on over here, and they drilled into that. And so that's now coming up on 60 years.
Can you drill a primary water well to feed an aquifer purposely? I mean, how many aquifers are fed by primary water, and why are aquifers drying up? Because if they are fed by primary water, they should be not drying up. Or how does that work?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's actually kind of similar to what happened in the oil patch. They were all going for easy oil in the basins and all of that, right? And there wasn't much of that after a while in the U.S., not like out here in the Middle East where, it's still, although they're having to go deeper now as they pump, how many million barrels a day. So they had to get smart and discover and listen, by the way, to the Russians and learn from them, who after World War II had their own moonshot mission, and that was to become independent in oil, all right, in an emerging world of diesel and so forth. And where did they go? Okay, it was Kudryavtsev who said, wait a minute, oil's made in the earth, and we know this. And he went to eastern Ukraine and he developed those wells and that oil fields in hard rock. Okay, that's not where you were supposed to find oil. You think they were going to give that up when the same crazies who took down Lebanon and Syria also wanted to take out Ukraine? They developed all that area. They developed the heavy industry out there. Most of those people consider themselves Russians. I'm not taking sides in the bloody Civil War, but they developed those fields, and they developed them where no one would have predicted there was oil. Fast forward another 40 years, and American frackers started realizing, hey, there's shale layers that we can actually get oil out of using techniques and so forth and so on, right? And so water is a kind of, it's interesting. We're not anywhere usually near oil. They're near salt domes. They have their own kind of formations that aren't interesting to us. Sometimes they go through our zones, and get the water, but rarely do we see them, because nowadays, again, they're usually deeper, or they're in a shale and they're fracking it out of the shale. And we're not even close to that shale. Usually we're much, again, pinpricks, but it's the same kind of concept. We've been overdrafting the basins, right? Of what? Hydrological rainwater, right? I say rainwater, watershed, water table, aquifer. And that's all we've been thinking about. And I can come in sometimes within the aquifer and in the basin and say, well, look at this fault that's going through here. How about I drill on that? And wow, why does it have no correlation with your other rain-fed wells? And why is it such high quality? But we can track those up onto the foothills, onto tectonic places that are rock. And they, all the time we go to where it's rock, people are like, what are you doing? Like in UNICEF in southern Madagascar, I purposely picked the side of that shear zone rock, starting at rock above 50, 80 feet below the surface there, to predict we could get water at 75 meters, and we hit it, right? So nobody can say, oh, well, maybe that's aquifer water. Maybe no, we drilled for 75 meters and core drilled, taking out the rock in cores like a miner, and brought out that water. So there's massive amounts of water brought up to the surface in our mountains. It's why the mountains are the origins, not just because of gravity flow of our rivers, creeks, but in fact, most of them start at little springs coming out of those mountains. And the studies of the isotopes of those sources are telling a story. But for those people to get that out there more is difficult, but it's telling the story. That are in Palomar Mountain alone, that is telling that story for sure. So we look, you know, people look up for water and they minimize their chances of success in a drying world. We look down for water and watch it come up and increase our chances of success. Then we use some technology and some different thinking, right, to locate it and bring it up. There is no other industry around right now that needs disruption more than groundwater and water well drilling. Our grandparents would look at it and go, you're doing the same thing, same rigs and the same old water witchers walking around. They would see nothing different today. And yet we say there's no water. We say there's a water crisis. And yet we're told that. And then we're told, oh, hey, you're drilling. You don't do that. Oh, hey, wait, you have canal water. Hey, we're a municipality. Don't compete with us, right? Here's a new term for you, maybe. Right of capture, rule of capture, law of capture, right? Back to English law. It means you buy the property, you have the right what's underneath it, right? Now, with minerals, okay, there's mineral rights and so forth. But with water, every state east of the Colorado River Compact is right of capture in the United States. Texas is right of capture. Look at Google Earth again at the panhandle of Texas and compare it to eastern New Mexico, same climate. They got agriculture, they got everything going on there, right? Because if it's your property, you can drill. And then guess what that does? It allows entrepreneurship, new thinking, technology to come in and solve problems versus state water authorities, the Bureau of Land Management of Reclamation that owns the dams, the state authorities that own the canals, the municipalities like the Metropolitan Authority of Los Angeles, the biggest and most brutal of all of them. They will not let Needles, California, take water from the Colorado River, even in crisis. You think they want to lose a single drop to any town? And they sit on there. People worldwide have asked me, what's the mark? They're on the river. I said, they're not allowed to touch it. Okay, the cities on the river can't touch it because they sold their rights off to California a long time ago because they had some wells, next to the river. And yeah, okay, we'll sell off our water rights. That's why they were in serious crisis. Look at the article in the LA Times. So we've built ourselves into our own water jail in many respects in the west of the U.S.
Mark, we're coming to the end of the hour here, but it's been fascinating. I want to let Kevin have another chance to ask a question or comment. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, I was going to ask, as pure as the primary water is, obviously when it hits the surface, you would be dealing with a lot of surface pollution and toxins. So are there mechanisms or systems in place of how you protect the water and maintain its purity so it doesn't get polluted by anything on the surface?
Yeah, excellent question. And that is where the production side comes into play, the drilling side. The video of NUUU shows no water, chemicals, bentonite, nothing being used to drill that hole other than air. And all you see is powder coming out of it. And then they hit the source and it even came up free flowing. But even if it doesn't come free flowing, you can do proper casing and proper well completion once you get to the source. And like I say, at least now with technologies, we can do a much better job of predicting where that source will be and just telling the driller, we're not even interested in the top 100, 200, which we think may be more contaminated anyway from the activity in the area over the last years, decades, century. And so, yes, the well completion side, I don't want to minimize it. And it's much more expensive than the exploration side. Drilling side is probably 80% and completion 80 to 90% of your costs. So we're just an insurance policy, kind of high-tech water witchers, if you will, to come in and help you locate it, and then advise you on the drilling side, which drillers to reach out to, and try to educate a bit more the property owner and the one paying for that well. But it's a good question. But it can be sealed out quite well using proper drilling techniques.
Great. When our funding comes in, Mark, we're going to have you down in Mexico to irrigate Mexico. They need a lot of help down here.
A sus órdenes, señor, sin ningún problema. Yo nací en Guatemala. I was born in Guatemala. I have no problem to go to Mexico.
Oh, yeah, you were. Okay, excellent. As you know, we're in Baja. We're
Yeah,
south
beautiful.
of Rosarito here. So
Yeah, beautiful.
we have the
area.
volcanic rock. A lot of you say it's pretty shallow, pretty. Don't have to go too deep around here.
I don't think so. Paul Power located a well there that the guys pickaxe down to about, I don't know, 20, 30, 40 feet, produced a beautiful flow for them.
Wow.
They were kind of an eco resort, eco retreat area down there, and great example. Yeah.
Oh, maybe I can hire somebody. It's only $3 an hour they work for.
Exactly.
Do it by
They didn't
hand.
have enough money in their case for the rig, and so he worked hard to find a shallow target and just said, "Go at it, boys!" And they did, and they struck a beautiful water source for that. I'll try to get you the name of that. I haven't looked it up in a while, but I know a year ago or two I saw their website, and they seem to be doing well.
Great. Thank you again, Mark. It's a pleasure. We'll see you around, hopefully.
Great.
Good luck.
Look forward
Bye.
to it. Anytime. Thank you for your time, guys. Bye.
Bye.